We are currently just 2 months into 2021, and already the film Music, directed by famous pop star Sia, is shaping up to be one of the most controversial movies of the year. From the dubious depictions of autism to Sia's Twitter meltdown to somehow being nominated for a Best Musical or Comedy Golden Globe despite very little praise from critics or audiences, this film hasn't exactly pleased everyone. For a film that is clearly trying to be nothing more than the movie equivalent to one of those live, laugh, love posters, it sure has caused a considerable amount of backlash. So, what exactly did go wrong with Music then? Well, let's start from the beginning. Pop icon Sia decided to make her directorial debut by making a movie that was, in her words, a love letter to the autistic community and their carers. But even before the movie was released, there were some major issues. First, the news that while originally the titular character was indeed going to be portrayed by an actually autistic actress, she ended up being replaced by the neurotypical Maddie Ziegler. A lot of people were unhappy with the notion that a supposedly autism-positive movie had sidelined an actually autistic actress, and on top of that, Maddie Ziegler's performance, being a neurotypical mimicking a non-verbal autistic girl, came across kind of like a caricature. Having now seen the movie, I do feel these concerns were valid. I don't blame Ziegler, as she was just 15 and clearly not ready for something like this, but the performance is kind of over-exaggerated to the point where I do understand the people who felt it looked like mockery. The second issue was, of course, the movie's partnership with infamous quote-unquote charity Autism Speaks, an organisation more or less despised by the autistic community for their downright vile portrayals and treatment of autistic people. Sia insisted that she wasn't aware of how terrible the charity has been to autistic people, even though she was at one point. And this brings me to my next point, Sia's Twitter fiasco. While at first Sia tried to respond to criticism in a fairly professional manner, eventually things broke down as she got angry and went as far as to sling some rather petty insults at the haters. Things were already not looking too good. So, with all that out the way, let's talk about the movie then. The film opens on the titular character Music, a mostly non-verbal autistic girl living with her grandma. We see Music's daily routine as her grandma and neighbours all care for her and do what they can to ensure her comfort and safety. The unfortunate, overacted performance of Music aside, things aren't so bad. If this movie actually focused on the relationship between Music and her grandma and neighbours, and how she goes through her everyday life, I honestly think it wouldn't have been too bad. But unfortunately, despite the film being named after her, Music is not the lead character here. That would be her older sister Zoo. Zoo is Music's newly sober sister who becomes Music's carer after her grandma suddenly dies. And in all honesty, she's a pretty horrible character. Despite being a sister, Zoo has the personality of a typical deadbeat parent. She doesn't understand music, she doesn't bother to read her grandma's instructions on how to care for her, she often causes her distress, and the film really likes to let us know how self-centered and uncaring she is by having her repeatedly point out that she doesn't care that her grandma is dead, all the while kind of laughing and smiling like it's no big deal. Also, she makes all her money dealing drugs. Maybe if this were a serious look into this extremely flawed character, it'd be less awkward, but this movie has a severe problem with its tone, which we'll get into later. Zoo is trying to make enough money to run away to Costa Rica, but in the meantime she's stuck caring for Music, with the help of her neighbour Abo, who she gradually falls in love with, as he seems almost too good to be true. As they get to know each other, they both learn that the two of them are dealing with serious personal problems, and while things may never be perfect, they can still find happiness with each other and with Music. So before anything else, let's address the other controversy that erupted after this movie was released, the restraint scenes. Whenever Music goes into a meltdown, either Ebo or Zoo attempts to calm her using a prone restraint hold, a form of treatment that has literally killed autistic people in the past, and should not be encouraged. Sia tried to walk this back by attempting to remove the scenes and adding a disclaimer about them, which I guess is progress, but still, they are once again very uncomfortable to watch. Removing these scenes wouldn't exactly make the movie any good though. A huge problem this movie has is indeed the issue with its tone. This movie wants to be a bright, happy and peppy easy watch, yet the lead character is an alcoholic drug dealer completely failing to be a guardian to her sister. This just flat out doesn't work. For starters, it completely exacerbates the problem with Zoo's character. She's a pretty horrible, careless person, and that would be okay if it was a serious dark drama or even black comedy that acknowledged this and showed her eventually developing into a better person, but instead, even the scenes of her dealing drugs have a sweet lightheartedness to them, which makes it seem like she's supposed to be likable and relatable. Instead, her negligent and uncaring nature sticks out like a sore thumb compared to other decent characters like Abo, George, or Music herself. Speaking of which, despite this being a potential opportunity to be a fun story centered around a neuroatypical character, instead, Music often feels sidelined and nothing more than a prop to serve for Zoo's character development. Now, the film did come up with a semi-decent idea of having Music's daydreams and train of thought being presented as musical numbers, which, while interesting in concept, once again just adds to the tonal whiplash, especially given how out of place and out of nowhere they feel. And honestly, they seem like less fun musical dream sequences and more just like very generic music videos shoved in without a care as to whether or not they actually fit the movie. Like I said, this movie really doesn't know whether it wants to be a light-hearted, fun little movie or a serious drama, and instead what we get is an awkward mismatch of both that just feels confused and uncomfortable. If there's any positives I will give to this movie, it's that the scene where Zoo finds out Abo is HIV positive is actually handled pretty well. Neither character really says a word, but Zoo's reaction seems to simply suggest that she understands the situation and she doesn't judge him for it. If all of the movie's scenes were given this kind of seriousness and subtlety with a simple bittersweet tone, then maybe this would have been a much better movie. And speaking of which, well, if that's what went wrong, how would I try to make it a better movie? Well, frankly, as I say, I would have made it actually about music. The notion of showing her dreams and fantasies through musical numbers is a good idea. Just make it less generic pop videos and more artistic. Maybe instead of having Zoo become her carer and learning to live with her, make it so that Zoo is moving in with Grandma, who doesn't die in this version, and it's Music who has to learn to live with and understand her new sister. After all, it would be nice for once to have a neuroatypical character in the lead role who goes through her own development, rather than playing second fiddle to the neurotypical protagonist. And while it's fine to have Zoo as a flawed character with a lot of baggage, maybe don't make her seem so careless and immature all the time. Show her as someone who genuinely is hurt and trying to improve her life. If there's a lesson to be learned from this movie and all of the fiasco that followed it, it's this. When tackling a very serious subject like this, please do the research. Sia claims she did years worth of research, and while I'm not saying she's a liar, I do question how she did so much research and yet not only ended up partnering with a charity as rightfully hated as Autism Speaks, but also including some genuinely harmful depictions of autism care in the restraint scenes. Like, it's not hard to find out why both of these things are bad. All it takes is a few Google searches. I'm sure Sia really did just want to tell a sweet Oscar bait story about neurodivergence, but frankly, she just wasn't the right person to do it. If anything, the tweet that I find most telling is the one where she refers to Music as specially abled rather than disabled. That just shows how much of an extremely sugar-coated, condescending attitude this movie has towards autistic people. Disability is not a bad word. If you want to be respectful of disabled or neurodivergent people, then don't treat them like burdens, but at the same time, don't treat them like precious little angels too pure for this world. Both of these views are dehumanizing. Disabled people are still people. While a disability is nothing to be ashamed of, acting like we should pretend it's all sunshine and rainbows isn't helping, it's condescending. And if anything, the fact that this movie got a Golden Globe nomination just goes to show how unfortunately prevalent that attitude is. The fact that people thought this was a meaningful representation, if anything, shows just why it's important that neuroatypical actors and writers get more of a voice in the film industry. Because quite frankly, at this point in time, I think we need some more genuine representation and less unfortunate, badly researched depictions like this. And I can only hope that the industry's reaction to such people will be better than Sia's. Thanks for watching the video. In case you couldn't tell, I really don't recommend watching this movie, and no, I don't think it should have been nominated for an award. I do want to say again not to harass Maddie Ziegler over this, since she was only 15, and I know she didn't want to be seen as making fun of anyone. Anyways, as always, like, share, subscribe, donate to me on Patreon if you can, and absolutely do not, under any circumstance, donate money to Autism Speaks. And with that said, I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye.